Hello, Dr. Godfrey, Professor Thomas, and any other LLC faculty member who watches this. My name is Callum Carr, and my capstone project research revolved around the use of canonical literature and modern young adult literature in schools, resulting in this Romeo and Juliet and These Violent Delights, the advantages of pairing canonical and modern young adult literature. Now, as we all know, Shakespeare began in the Globe Theatre in Elizabethan London and from there exploded across the world and eventually into classrooms and the realm of canonical literature where it has stayed for centuries. Young adult literature, on the other hand, has been around for a much shorter time. It began in the mid 20th century, but only really found its footing with the popular book The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton in the mid 1960s. And The Outsiders was described by Caroline Hunt as one of the first books written, quote, for young readers that talked openly and honestly about real issues that impacted their lives, end quote. Today, young adult literature continues to be written with this idea. It continues to be written for young readers with plots revolving around characters their age that touch on issues in their personal lives, such as sexual orientation, anxiety, poverty, etc., and issues that have been and will continue to be talked about on a societal scale, like racism, immigration, and the importance of voting. In the past 5 years, young adult literature has become an even larger phenomenon, appealing to readers of all ages and backgrounds, with series like Leigh Bardugo's The Grishaverse and Angie Thomas's popular novel The Hate You Give. The work of writers like Bardugo and Thomas encapsulates the idea that books written for young readers can be both entertaining and thought-provoking. The centuries separating Shakespeare's work and modern young adult literature suggest there is little linking the two, and for decades there have been debates over what types of literature should be used in the classroom, with critics unable to come to a clear consensus. Now, this debate is not unwarranted. Research conducted via surveys in a high school English classroom and the Year of Epic Reads Facebook group, which is operated by Epic Reads, a subsidiary of HarperCollins that focuses on young adult books, revealed three main reasons that contribute to a decline in active reading, that is, reading outside of the classroom for an educational environment, reading for fun, among young people. And these three reasons are the idea that reading is a gendered activity, one only girls do, the idea that technology continues to present a distraction for young people, and the belief that books used in schools are boring and no longer relate to society today. And this last reason, the idea that that school books are boring, is the most important. Reversing decades worth of gendered stereotypes around reading is a task that will take years before any real change can be seen, and it is near impossible to put a halt to technological advancements in our society, which is governed with such a STEM mindset. Changing what books are used and how they are taught is the most expedient way to help young people become and remain active readers. The Year of Epic Reads survey, which received 526 responses from self-described active readers, had a little over 70% of respondents say they read every day, with a little over 60% saying they found the books they read in school to be boring. The high school survey, which received 56 responses, had a little over 80% say they found the books they read in school boring. Now, it can be expected that the vast majority of current students dislike the books they are being taught, but it is a testament to how ambivalent people are towards canonical literature that a little over 60% of self-described active readers said they thought the books they read in school to be boring. And it's important to keep in mind that those who thought these books to be boring, roughly 70% of them read every day, but they don't do this because they love the books they read in school. They read every day despite what they read in school. The decline in active readership among young people has been discussed for years, but despite this, and research showing how little benefit current students get from canonical literature, there are some who would see no change in school curriculum. In his article, Young Adult Literature in the Classroom, or Is It?, John Bushman quotes Bernice Cullinan's Inviting Readers to Literature, where she describes the idea of illiteracy and the idea of someone being illiterate, someone who is illiterate is, quote, a person who can read or write, but chooses not to use those skills very often, end quote. If research continues to show that students who become and remain active readers do so despite the books they read in school, then illiteracy will remain an issue. But if the books being taught in school can be modified so higher interest, modern young adult titles can be incorporated, then the issue of illiteracy may be reversed. When it comes to the debate over what books should be used in schools, there are three distinct factions. The first are those who do not want to see change in the books being used. The second are those who want to replace the books being used, and then the third are those who want to pair canonical and modern young adult novels. Now, those who do not want to see the books being changed in schools say that the young adult books that are being used are done so because they are, quote, simply written and easily understood, end quote. And while this may have been true of past young adult literature, the gains in complexity and sophisticated writing in the past 5 years alone is remarkable. And as one critic said, quote, many young adult novels are well written, carefully crafted, emotionally powerful works of literature, end quote. Among those who agree modern young adult literature has as much value as canonical literature, there are the two remaining factions. Those who want to replace the books being used have their argument summarized in Mike Roberts' Dear Mr. Shakespeare, Please Stay Out of My Middle School English Class. In his article, written rhetorically as a letter to Shakespeare, Roberts lists several reasons why he believes the canonical books should be replaced, citing their complex language, their unrelatable themes, and the idea that some students just aren't ready for them yet. Roberts believed there should be something between the elementary chapter books of elementary school and the complex plays of middle school and high school. And he thinks that this something should be young adult novels that share similar plots or themes. However, the young adult novels implemented in the past are too safe, too on the nose, and are all around too similar to the original texts. Professor John Noel Moore, who had experience as a teacher in a classroom where students were given quote unquote similar books, had experience with a pupil who once asked if he was in a class for students with learning disabilities when that student learned he would be reading a shortened version of Romeo and Juliet. Young adult novels like Saving Juliet by Suzanne Selfers and Romeo and Juliet by Sharon M. Draper are examples of ones that are too similar to the original text in just their titles alone. Plus, these books, published in 2008 and 1999 respectively, are too old to be considered modern young adult titles, as they no longer relate to society today, as well as more recently published books. If the goal of English teachers everywhere is to have students both value canonical literature and become and remain active readers outside the classroom, then pairing young adult and canonical literature will appeal to those who want to replace books entirely and appease those who don't want to see any change at all. While pairing is not a perfect solution, it is better than the one or the other mindset that has dominated classrooms of the past and present. As mentioned, the use of young adult books in the past has not been the best, but the quality of young adult novels has grown exponentially in recent years, resulting in a voluminous number of titles for teachers to choose from. But as a result of this, teachers now have to have rigorous requirements for young adult books if they want to use them in the classroom. And some of these requirements should include that the young adult novel share a plot and or themes with a piece of canonical literature. The young adult novel should entertain students with an interesting plot and relatable characters. And if a young adult novel can do all of this, then it will help students become invested in the stories they read and by conjunction their education, and will help them make connections between the canonical text and the young adult text and the real world around them. One book that meets all these requirements with flying colors is These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. These Violent Delights is a young adult historical fiction fantasy novel published in November of 2020, and it was Gong's debut novel and the first in a duology, with the sequel, Our Violent Ends, released earlier this month. Now, at first glance, These Violent Delights does not come across as a Shakespearean retelling, with the red roses and golden dragon entwined around a dagger emblazoned with a Chinese character Tsai. Not even the cover alludes to Shakespeare. Only those who have critically read Romeo and Juliet will recall Friar Lawrence's famous line, which lends Gong's novel its title. These violent delights have violent ends, and in their triumph die, like fire and powder, which, as they kiss, consume. Gong introduced many changes to both the characters and plot. Juliet Capulet is now Juliet Tsai, who is the daughter of Lord and Lady Tsai, who operate the Scarlet Gang, a network of criminals that live in Shanghai, who have a blood feud with the White Flowers, another gang comprised primarily of Russian immigrants who fled the Bolshevik Revolution. At the head of the White Flowers is Lord Montague, whose son, Roma, was formerly Romeo Montague in Shakespeare's original version of Romeo and Juliet. Other changes include Rosalind Capulet is now Rosalind Lang, who is a cousin to Juliet, and in Gong's version has a transgender sister, Kathleen, who is a character of Gong's creation. Mercutio is now Marshal Sio, a staunch friend to Roma, who has the beginnings of a romantic relationship with Benedict Montague, formerly Benvolio. And another important change is that Friar Lawrence is now Lorenz, a Dutch scientist who, in These Violent Delights, manufactured the white serum that can put people in a death-like state for up to 3 hours before they wake up again. And as you can imagine, there are multiple plot changes made in These Violent Delights. In These Violent Delights, Roma and Juliet's romantic relationship came to an abrupt and violent end when Juliet learned Roma orchestrated a bombing on Scarlet territory that resulted in the death of Juliet's nurse. Now, 4 years later, Roma and Juliet are forced to work together as they seek to discover the people and secrets behind a madness that has taken root throughout the city, which forces people to kill themselves. And they have to do this all while battling with family members who want to take their place as heir in their respective gangs, and while dealing with a communist revolution simmering in a city under the thumb of foreign colonial powers. Gong's novel is full of conversations relevant to young adults and the contemporary world, from immigration, identity, and imperialism to belonging, vaccinations, and white supremacy. When studied in tandem, Romeo and Juliet and These Violent Delights will complement each other and make reading a piece of canonical literature more appealing to students. There are benefits to both keeping canonical literature, introducing young adult literature, and pairing the two. And these are just some of the benefits. These are some of the ones I believe are not talked about as often, but are just as important. Canonical literature has its relevance has as much relevance inside the classroom as it does outside of the classroom, and Romeo and Juliet is a perfect example of this. The influence of Romeo and Juliet in our world can be seen in a wide array of media, from the Academy Award-winning West Side Story to S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders to Taylor Swift's song Love Story. At the very least, not exposing students to Shakespeare's play puts them at a disadvantage outside of the classroom, and because of how widespread Romeo and Juliet is throughout popular culture, it would be irresponsible to at least not give students a basic understanding of its plots and themes. When canonical and young adult literature, specifically Romeo and Juliet and These Violent Delights, are paired, one incredible example of how students and teachers benefit from it is how students will be able to study language. Sally Law, the principal teacher of English at Moore College in Scotland, said, quote, "Studying classical literature from the Western canon affords students of English the opportunity to understand, analyze, and evaluate language quite different from their own," end quote. Law also made the argument that continuing to use canonical literature allows students to better develop their own language and study how language has evolved over time. Gong also incorporates elements of the Chinese language in These Violent Delights. The inclusion of the Chinese pinyin, which is the romanization of Chinese characters based on their pronunciation, has no effect on how well an individual who doesn't speak Chinese understands the book. If anything, it provides students with the opportunity to learn a part of a language not typically offered in many regions across the United States. And when it comes to the benefits of incorporating young adult literature in the classroom, there are two main benefits that I'd like to focus on. The first, and perhaps this is the most glaring difference between These Violent Delights and Romeo and Juliet, and quite possibly the biggest gripe many critics have with modern popular young adult fiction, is how much more entertaining Gong's novel is. There are moments of action that result in character death in Romeo and Juliet, but students don't get to experience these scenes as audience members do. In the books read in schools, these action scenes are reduced to stage direction, so a fight between Mercutio and Tybalt is reduced to, quote, "they fight, Tybalt falls." While in Gong's novel, these scenes are expanded upon and are given much more than a 4-word summary that we get in Shakespeare's version because he cannot effectively portray an action scene through dialogue. When it comes to the second main benefit of incorporating young adult literature, comes into how it relates to the modern world. These Violent Delights does not shy away from important social issues that students should be able to talk and write critically about. Perhaps the most poignant passage in the novel occurs when the characters are discussing if it is better to flee the city before a communist revolt breaks out. When one of them asks where they would go, another suggests America, and this passage follows. A snort floats up in the clouds. It is the only sound that epitomizes the land in question, somehow both charming and terrible, both dismissive and weighted down. The land of dreams, where men and women in white hoods roam the streets to murder black folks, where written law prohibits the Chinese from stepping upon its shores, where immigrant children are separated from immigrant mothers on Ellis Island, never to be seen again. Even the land of dreams needs to wake up sometimes. This passage alone allows students to make comparisons to events that took place in the United States in the past 5 years. From the mob of neo-Nazis in Charlottesville, Virginia, to the Muslim ban installed by the previous administration, to the detention facilities along the US-Mexico border that separated parents from their children. Students and teachers will have no shortage of topics to choose from that relate to important social issues when they use these Violent Delights in classrooms. Now, it would be remiss of me to discuss young adult literature without mentioning the recent challenges many young adult books have faced as a result of Texas State Congressman Matt Krause. Roughly 800 books and their place in school libraries was called into question by Krause and his 16-page list that he submitted to the Texas Education Agency. The books included in this list that Krause said he was looking for and inquiring about included those that talked about, quote, human sexuality, sexually transmitted diseases or HIV or AIDS, sexually explicit images, graphic presentations of sexual behavior that is in violation of the law, or contain material that might make students feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress because of their race or sex, or convey that a student, by virtue of their race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. In these 4 books, Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas, A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee, Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Byron, and Perfect on Paper by Sophie Gonzalez are just 4 popular young adult novels that are included on Krause's list. Despite being a book that discusses colonialism and sexism, contains queer characters, and was written by an author of color, These Violent Delights does not appear on Krause's list, but it begs the question, how long will it be until Gong's novel is challenged? Literature of every genre and age range has been challenged and will continue to be challenged. There will always be those, like Gong, who seek to challenge the heteronormative patriarchal world, and then there will be those who want to have these challengers erased from the narrative. Despite the obstacles they may face, it is part of a teacher's job to provide students with the skills to critically read and analyze all forms of literature. I'm going to start that part over, sorry. Despite the obstacles they may face, it is a teacher's job to provide students with the skills to critically read all forms of literature so they can come to their own conclusions and eventually decide for themselves what books the next generation will read in schools. Thank you. Here's my works cited. Pretty boring. I'm going to breeze past it very quickly. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, or complaints, don't really want complaints, but if you've got them, I'll take them, about my presentation or These Violent Delights, please feel free to email me below. Thank you again.